Joe, if I had to explain to a board of directors the value of the 5 case model, the value of business cases, could you just take me through how you would handle that? You got 10 minutes in front of a group of people to take them through the process and the value they would get out of following that process.
Okay, I think the first point I would make is that it's not about writing a business case. As I've often said, it's about scoping and planning an intervention, if you like, a scheme, and related spend. And the business case is simply the repository for the evidence base. The second point I would make is that it doesn't start with the business case. People need to have undertaken research and development, due diligence. They may have actually had to undertake studies. It's very important to understand the status quo, and that in the business case provides the basis for business as usual and the counterfactual for the intervention and spend. And you'd be surprised how often in the public sector people don't understand the existing landscape, the cost of their existing service, the volumes that are involved, the unit costs. The number of times I went into a hospital and said, "You've just told me you're going to reduce the cost of that bed. What is the existing cost?" And nobody could tell me.
Right.
That is a very basic example. So understanding what you currently got. The other point I would make is in relation to what I refer to as the 5 Ps. People are very focused at an early stage on the procurement. They need to think more laterally than that. They need to think about the procurement in the context of the project, all the other activities that you will have to do in-house and how those are going to be resourced. You need to understand the project in the context of the programme, because the project just delivers the output in the short term. It's the programme that improves outcomes and service delivery in the medium term. And you want to understand how the programme fits within the strategic portfolio. It's the strategic portfolio that delivers on the government's and organisation's strategic objectives over the longer term. And you want to understand how the strategic portfolio, the constituent programmes and projects, support organisational policies moving forward. And actually, we're talking about land-based schemes at the moment. They are portfolios. And actually what we're trying to do is to build the optimum in terms of our mix of programmes and projects. Now, all of that relates to the private sector and the organisation. So you have to understand the 5 Ps. The next thing is you have to understand very clearly what your investment objectives are, what the targeted outcomes that you're trying to achieve are, and they have to be smart, specific, measurable, accurate, achievable, relevant, time-constrained. You need to be able to measure these things, to monitor them during the delivery phase.
But Joe, just to stop you there, I know one time you were an executive within the NHS. So what would be smart objectives for a new hospital? Would it be the number of patients that go through it? What would those smarts be for something like that?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Now, in my experience, there are 5 prime drivers, and I'm not talking about the 5 Ps now. I'm talking about the 5 prime drivers for intervention, change and spend. One is simply economy, to reduce the cost. So it could be to reduce the cost of an existing service by X by Y. Another reason for intervention and spend in the public sector is to improve efficiency. That's the throughput of the service. So it could be to increase efficiency by X by Y. Another reason, and this is the reason that is dear to senior management and politicians' hearts, is to improve the effectiveness of the service and the quality of the service, and also to, very often, to introduce new services. So effectiveness is important. So it could be to make it more effective by X, by Y. Now, another reason is quite basic, and a lot of capital spend is related to this. Infrastructure doesn't last forever. Roads need to be replaced. Hospitals need to be rebuilt. Schools need to be replaced. So a major driver for intervention spend is replacement. Right. And last but not least, and this is really important, compliance. At one end of the scale, that's statutory, things like health and safety, and I'm thinking of the Grenfell Tower. At the other end, it's compliance with best practice, the kind of stuff that APMG provides around program and project management. So people need to think about these 5 things, I think, and in terms of their spending their investment objectives. What are we seeking to achieve here? Is it about improving the quality of the service? Is it about reducing the cost, the throughput? Or are we complying or just simply replacing?
And when before you start, do you come up with a view on by how much you want to increase efficiency, by how much you want to reduce cost? Or is that I know you said about SMART objectives, so it suggests that they are defined. But do you start with that definition?
So the methodology applies to all things. At the scoping stage, yes, you do need to come up with a target. But I said earlier, a project does not start without some R&D and due diligence. And as a result of that, a feasibility study, a full study, you would come up with a notion, an idea of what is achievable realistically. Now, the important point about that is that at an early stage, what you should be thinking in terms of a range. It will be between 10 and 20%. What you should avoid saying is 15.
Yeah.
At the planning stage, when more information is available and you've done more around research and development, that range will reduce. And you will probably be saying between 13 and 17%. But what I would say to people is you should avoid a single point estimate. People come up too early with, we're going to reduce the cost of this service by 15%. That's rubbish. That's putting yourself out to hang. Always think in terms of a range, because I always say to people, every figure I read in the business case is wrong. Now, the issue is how wrong.
Interesting point. So people then do some feasibility, they come up with some targets, it's linked to the overall policy. So what's then the next stage in the development of the business case?
Right. So you had a workshop to work out, to agree the 5 Ps, so you understand strategic fit, and to work out the case for change. So you've got smart investment objectives, you're clear on what the existing arrangements are, you're clear on what your business needs are, you're clear on what the potential scope for the scheme is, you're clear on what some of the benefits are going to be, the key benefits are going to be, what the key risks are going to be, what the constraints are, and what the dependencies are, what has to be in place to make your scheme a success. Workshop 1. You then move on to option appraisal. What is the best option? And what we're looking for at this stage is what we call the preferred option. And what we do at the outset, we look at a wide range of possible choices. And for that, we use something called the options framework filter, which is just pure decision theory. It breaks down any scheme into its constituent parts. So in a facilitated workshop, and you really do need training for this, You need to have gone through the foundation, the practitioner courses, certainly at this stage. Using the options framework filter in a facilitated workshop, you look through the choices for scope, in other words, coverage of the project or program. You look at options for the potential solution. You look at options for service delivery. You look at options for implementation. And you look at options for funding to evolve a shortlist for the project that at the next stage, the planning stage or the outline business case stage, you will actually cost in terms of costs, benefits and risks to actually identify through various tools and techniques the preferred option moving forward.
And the next workshop?
The next workshop, so workshop 2 was around options appraisal. The third workshop will be around the commercial case, having identified the preferred option, having come to some understanding about the service requirements, having understood what the output-based specification looks like, in other words, the services and outputs you want. It's then to look at the risks involved, how the risks can be shared between the public and private sectors, who should bear what risks, what the contractual arrangements would look like, what the timescales for the contracts would look like, what the contract currencies would be, how the risks would be tied down in the contract. To look at all of these things, because what we want to be is intelligent customers. We don't know the answer, but we should have some views as to what the procurement should look like. Frankly, the days 30 years ago where I was told, well, it doesn't matter, Joe, just leave it to the supply side. They'll tell us, in relation to what we want to buy, how they want us to pay. Those days are over. We don't do it in our personal lives. We shouldn't be doing it in our professional lives. So the third workshop is around the commercials and the commercial case.
And have we now got a business case, or are we still developing the business case?
No, we're still developing the business case. In relation to the 5 case models, at this stage, we've bottomed out, we've got a scheme that actually has a compelling case for change and provides strategic fit. Using the options framework in the second workshop, we've identified the preferred option. In the third workshop, we've identified what the commercials could look like. We're now on to the fourth part of the business case, the financial case. What's it look like? What does it look like in terms of affordability? In other words, what are the whole life costs going to be, the capital costs and the running costs? And this is extremely important. Everyone at an early stage focuses on the capital costs, the procurement costs. Actually, typically in terms of the whole life costs, they are only between 17% and 17 and 20% of the cost. So we need to understand what the whole life costs are to be. If there's a budget already agreed, are there any gaps? That is the purpose of the financial case. Now, lastly, and very importantly, we come to the management case, which is all about delivery. And there are 3 main reasons for programme project failure in government. They come up consistently. One is change. They call that political interference. Some of these projects take 10 to 15 years to achieve. Governments come and go every 4 or 5 years. HS2 is an example of that. The next one is poor planning, a poor business case. Well, I'm covering that off in this conversation. The third reason, and it's a major reason, is lack of resources. We simply haven't got the competence and capability and the resources to deliver the services we need. So we end up with Morris Nightingale hospitals, where we've got the hospital, but we haven't got the staff to provide the service. The management case is all about bottoming that out. It's about It's about designing the solution. It's about building the solution. It's about delivering and operating the solution, and making sure that we've got all the plans and all the governance we need in place to manage the attendant to manage the attendant risks and bring on stream the desired benefits.
And now I've got my business case, have I?
Broadly speaking, yes.
And is that my outline business case?
Everything I've said is relevant to scoping the business case. You do as much as you can, but it's an iterative exercise. It's not a sequence you go through. All of that needs to be revisited and added to at the later stage, the planning stage, the outline business case stage. And that's really important prior to the procurement. And once you've gone through the procurement, the purpose of the full business case is simply to document what it is you've agreed in terms of investment objectives, the preferred option, the commercials that you've agreed, the financials that you've agreed, the management plans that you've agreed. That's the purpose of the full business case. But it doesn't stop there. That business case should be to use to monitor the delivery and the progress of the scheme, and also for the purposes of post-evaluation in terms of did you achieve your investment objectives and the business benefits that you sought to achieve.
Fascinating. You mention workshops quite a lot. I know there's no single point answer to this, but how long are these workshops? I mean, are they a few hours or are they a few days?
How long is the piece of string? It depends on the nature of the scheme. I mean, some of these workshops can last days, others can be undertaken in the morning. Typically, they take a day. And typically, for smaller schemes, I've been able to do workshops 1 and 2 in a day. Now, look, people say business cases are too slow, they're too expensive, too time-consuming. They don't need to be. I have actually, for some major schemes, deliver the business case within weeks. In a single week, with the relevant stakeholders, I bottomed out the case for change in workshop 1. I've done that in the morning. I bottomed out the preferred option using the options framework filter, scoped and planned that in an afternoon. The resource, the time, has actually gone into somebody writing up the business case. Now, business cases don't need to be 200 pages. You don't need 60 pages of strategic fit when one side of A4 explaining the 5 Ps will do. All they need to contain is the relevant information. They should be as short as possible. And, just an aside for one moment, the executive summary should explain everything somebody's approving the case needs to know in no more than 5 pages. So they need to be shorter. So what I'm saying is, I've already said it's not about writing a document, it's about scoping and planning a scheme. I'm saying that I've largely done that in a couple of days for some organisations. We don't need to be spending just shy of £2 billion in the public sector on business cases. We need to be bringing our thinking in-house, not outsourcing it.
How much do you think the public sector spends?
There are something like 800. Something like 800 organisations in the public sector. If you assume they have a number, 2-3 procurements a year. If you assume they need a couple of business cases a year. If you assume that they need to go through the SOC OBC process, if you assume a SOC takes between 10 and 30 days, an OBC between 30 and 60 for a large scheme, and the FBC 10 to 30 days, if you do the arithmetic, the figure is just shy of £2 billion. And so, we need to stop thinking about writing business cases. We need to stop outsourcing our thinking. We need to bring it back in-house. And that is why, the training is so important in terms of getting people to think for themselves. And also various tools and techniques that I know are being delivered in partnership with APMG to facilitate the actual production of the case.